What a few days it has been at Newcastle. We can speak live now to our North East reporter, Keith Downie, who's joining us here on Good Morning Transfers. Good morning to you, Keith. Let's start with Kieran Trippier then. Looks like he's not going anywhere this January transfer window.
Yeah, Dave, it's the story that's sort of kept us all busy here on Sky Sports News and up here covering the club in the North East for the last few days. It was a surprise, I think, to many of us when we heard that Bayern Munich had contacted Newcastle last Friday asking about his availability. Then, of course, we know what happened after that. 3 separate offers. First of all, a loan deal. Second, a permanent transfer for a nominal amount, I believe. And thirdly, an offer about 48, just short of 48 hours ago for around about £13 million that Newcastle rejected flat out. So that was Newcastle's stance. Kieran Trippier was going nowhere. Yesterday, Bayern Munich, of course, told us that through Sky Germany, they told us that they were planning to walk away. I thought that might mean they still had a little bit of legs in it and they might have still come back to the table, but no was the answer, because our sporting director, Christoph Freund, last night told our colleagues over in Sky Germany, he said, the topic of Trippier has been resolved. We only do what we are 100% convinced of, and that is not this deal. So I think they realised that, one, they weren't going to be able to afford Kieran Trippier, and two, Trippier was not going to agitate to leave due to his close bond with not just Eddie Howe, but also the ownership group at Newcastle United as well. So yeah, that puts a pin in this one, Dave, with about a week or so to go. Kieran Trippier looked as though he was on the move to the German champions, Bayern Munich, but no, Newcastle will be very relieved that one of their star players is staying.
I just want to bring in Ellen here. I mean, how big a boost is it for Newcastle that Kieran Trippier is staying?
Huge boost. It would have stung, wouldn't it? If he'd have gone, that would have really, really hurt the Newcastle fans. He's the player that kick-started this new era of Newcastle, showed a huge amount of faith in the project when he was brought in. And so to lose him at the first bump in the road, I think, would be something that would just really hurt the Newcastle fans. So a huge boost. And I think the fact that he hasn't agitated for a move as well is something that's worth noting, because an opportunity at that stage in his career to go to Bayern Munich could be seen as quite attractive. But like he said, he's got a great relationship with Eddie Howe. He's got a great relationship with the club there. He brings so much on and off the pitch. It's something I don't think we spoke about yesterday, but we spoke about that they've got this ready-made replacement potentially in Livramento, but actually the impact and the influence that Trippier has had on him, Livramento has said that he was there on his debut, chatting in his ear, he could hear him, he gave him such a boost. He was talking about the players that he'd come up against, giving him little insights, and just the way that these younger players in the team, obviously not the same position, but Lewis Miley, these young stars coming through who Newcastle are banking a lot in, will look up to Trippier, and actually to have him still within the team, I think is something that's a huge boost as well.
And Keith, I wanted to ask you around a price for Kieran Trippier. A lot's been made of this Darren Eales interview that he gave, where he talked about players having a price, and in this market and with PSR, which everyone likes to talk about, every player can be sold. So do we think there was a price that Newcastle had been looking for Kieran Trippier, or was this a different situation entirely where he's not for sale at any price?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Newcastle said that, or they certainly told us that was their plan. That Kieran Trippier was not for sale. Look, I think if a massive bid came in for him, I think it would have been difficult for them to turn down. Like any club, every club is dealing with PSR at the moment. It's causing so many problems. We know Newcastle are pretty much stuck at the moment. They've told us, both Eddie Howe and Darren Eales, the chief executive, in recent weeks have said, we need to sell before we can buy. And look, we're all aware of that. So I just think with Kieran Trippier, though, with the amounts that were being talked about, £13 million, could they have done a huge amount with that? Not really. If they managed to sell one of the other players, a younger player with a higher value for, say, £20-30 million, then yeah, they could do a lot with that. I think Trippier, he's invaluable, not just in terms of the way he plays and what he brings to the team. We all see his assists and, just his set piece work and everything he's done over the years in terms of experience, but what he's like behind the scenes as well, the way he speaks to the younger players, as Ellen says there, even the way he is with us guys in the media as well, he's a real talisman, and he's a leader, and he would be the club captain if it were not for the fact that Jamal Lascelles has been there for around 10 years. But he is the on-field leader. Look, to answer your question, I think if a huge bid came in, I think Newcastle would have found it very difficult. But I think at the figures that were being mentioned, it wasn't worth it for them. Remember, Newcastle paid round about 12 million for Kieran Trippier just 2 years ago. If they were to have accepted that 13 million, they would have only really made a £1 million profit. Now, yes, he is 33 years old, but as I say, everything that he brings to the table behind the scenes and on the pitch, I think made that one of the few players within the squad that Newcastle really did not want to lose, unless, as I say, it was a huge price that they couldn't turn down.
So Trippier stays. What about Miguel Almiron? What's the latest there?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one, Dave, because he is a player I think they could probably just about get away with losing. They've got Harvey Barnes and Jacob Murphy both coming back in, and they both play in the same position as him. Look, Newcastle are light all over the pitch due to their injuries at the moment. But you look at Almiron, 29 years old, a Paraguayan international. He will command a fairly big fee, and it will be bigger than the one that was being offered by Bayern for Kieran Trippier. So my understanding of the situation just now is that talks are still ongoing between Newcastle and the Saudi Pro League club Al Shabab. Al Shabab, I understand, are confident they will get a deal done. And I think he is a player that Newcastle could potentially let go. They need to sell to buy, as mentioned earlier. And Newcastle would, as I say, command a fee bigger than that of what was being offered for Trippier, probably around about 20 to 25 million pounds. The difficulty in this deal is that the player, as I'm told, wants to stay. Whereas Kieran Trippier, although he was happy to stay, he was flattered by the interest from Bayern Munich. I'm not quite sure whether Al Shabab is quite as appealing or interesting to Almiron as Bayern Munich was to Trippier. So look, we'll watch that one as the window ticks on. But I think he is the one of the 3 or 4 Newcastle players mentioned this week that could potentially go before the deadline.
So Flex, does selling Almiron just make more sense than selling Trippier just because of the finances involved, just because they're going to get more money in?
Absolutely. From the club's standpoint and the financial standpoint and a PSR standpoint, absolutely. And that's what we've just heard there. It would make much more sense to sell Almiron than it would for Kieran Trippier. What they can command for Miguel Almiron would be a lot more than Kieran Trippier as well. So in terms of balancing their books and being able to go and reinvest, they would have a lot more financial flexibility should they let Miguel Almiron leave the club. From Miguel Almiron's point of view, like we've just heard, or Miggy, as the Newcastle fans like to call him, he's endeared himself to the fans. You know, when you look at how Newcastle play under this Eddie Howe style, he is at it. He just does not stop running. He does not stop working. He works tirelessly. And, to the point where Jack Grealish had to apologise to him. It was a bit of a meme. Jack Grealish had to come out and say, I'm sorry for likening, I think it was Bernardo Silva to Miguel Almiron, something like that. But that sort of meme was sort of dropped by him, and we could see the sort of, yes, it was a bit of a purple patch, but in terms of his importance to this Newcastle side, it couldn't be understated. So I can see why he wants to stay at Newcastle. The fans love him. He loves the city. He loves the fans. And he's an integral part to that right-hand side of Newcastle as well, by the way. By retaining Kieran Trippier, and if they do retain Miguel Almiron, that is their right-hand side intact. It is a big move for him to leave. But financially, it does make more sense for Almiron to leave.
And at the start of the week, Keith, we were talking about Newcastle potentially losing 3 players this week, if you include a Callum Wilson involved in a potential deal. So the fact that they may only lose 1, they've lost a player, but does it count as a successful week for Newcastle?
Yeah, Dave, look, I don't think they were ever going to lose 3. I don't think they could afford to lose 3. Their injury situation is critical. They're missing, I think, 10 players at the moment. They wouldn't be able to lose that. I think what's happened there is, I think clubs have been alerted to the fact that Newcastle are up against their PSR restrictions. They know that they need to sell, and that is because Darren Neal's the chief exec and Eddie Howe have both underlined that in recent weeks. So I think some of the clubs, like Bayern Munich, like Atletico Madrid, like Al Shabab here, are seeing Newcastle and thinking we've got an opportunity to maybe pinch 1 or 2 of their players on the cheap here. So that's why a few of them are being linked. I don't think Newcastle would ever have sold 3. I think it was always going to be maximum of 1 out of that 3. Now, if Almiron does go and they manage to bank some money for that, I think they'll then turn their attentions to try and bring in a midfielder, because they are very light in that position at the moment. Of course, Sandro Tonali suspended until August. Joe Linton out probably until the end of the season, having had surgery earlier on this week, and they definitely need another midfielder. So if Almiron reluctantly on his part, and I think the club's part as well. They don't really want to lose him, but they might have to. If he does go, they will then try and reinvest that money into bringing in a central midfielder to complement the likes of Sean Longstaff and Bruno Guimaraes and Lewis Miley, who's we mentioned, 17 years old. He's played a lot of games this season, and there'll be a lot of pressure on his shoulders if they asked him to play from now until the end of the season. So that is why they are looking at settling someone, because they need to bring someone in, which just sums up how difficult this PR situation is. The clubs like Newcastle, who have spent a lot of money the last 2 years, but have not sold anyone. They have not traded very many players at all, and that is why they're in this position and they find themselves a little bit stuck this window.